In the second and third interviews, I will go into more detail about the extraterrestrial views and the philosophies the AI has given them on resonant oscillation and the natural good-evil principle of the club. Those so-called philosophies that Yahweh has taught them.
I guess many will have considerable anger towards these elites and the digital nobility.
I know it is hard to be lenient in this regard when it comes out what all these people have created. But as human beings, show clemency and be lenient with these exploited and equally enslaved elite people. Because how they too were, they are deceived people who would not have become what they were if they had not been deceived and tricked in the same way. That is why we must give them the warmth of our hearts, because they are also us. They are part of us and we are part of them. We will go with them and they will have to go with us. The price of liberation will be enormously high for each one of them.
Mildness and forbearance may not be so easy for many people. How should one get up the courage to feel that way? Especially when everything has come out? How things went and who is in charge of it all?
It is important to understand who is really behind it. That one does not permanently blame the exploited lackeys. Just as one should not condemn and accuse the simply consuming people of these days, who are mean to each other through installed mechanisms of guidance, suppression and control, because they themselves have only become victims of imposed life patterns. And that ultimately includes all of us. Humanity must have understood this by then, and it will. It will no longer surrender to the controlling mechanisms. Even if it will still occasionally clatter for decades to come, but for other reasons. In the end, only one person will be able to help the nobility, the club, and the elites. They will know who that is.
And what happens to the resistance elites? Or the ordinary people, who have always been persuaded that they are guilty? How do they fare? Are they all guilty too?
The resonance vibration affects every human being, of course, and on the basis of this vibration everyone will physically receive what they should and must receive. This has nothing to do with faith, repentance, purgatory and all the other constructs of guilt sold in religions or the religious superstition of being reborn as an animal as punishment, but with the purely quantum physical reaction from it. This cannot be avoided because it is part of the hyperdimensional quantum consciousness. At the most, you can divert it, you can do that, or, if you can do it, you can't look at it, but you would have to know how to do that. I must also explain that there is only physical guilt, spiritually there is only blamelessness. Guilt exists only in the physical form, because it is only made here and can and must be compensated here, in order to be able to return home to the hyperdimensional quantum consciousness via the physical path. But the quantum part of a human being, the soul, always remains pure, no matter what has been done in matter. That was also the reason why the nobility and the elites thought that there was no guilt at all, never, because guilt is never spiritually present. And therefore guilt would not really exist. But this was a distortion and a convenient adjustment for all seduced lackeys of Yahweh to act accordingly. Because when a soul, especially a soul entangled with guilt from dimension level 4 to 6 incarnates back into level 1 to 4, the material guilt also returns. And without repaying the quantum entanglement, i.e. the unrestriction of quantum entanglement, one does not get free from the 7-dimensional universe, but can only switch back and forth between dimension level 1 to 4 and dimension level 4 to 6, between birth and death. This happens above all to instrumentalized elites, because they cannot pay off their enormous causally generated entanglement of material debt in the material world during their lifetime. Club and nobility are hit even harder. The individuals of the club and the digital human nobility are unable to compensate for their guilt because of the heaviness of their guilt and their immortality in current life. Since they exist immortal and eternal, quantum entangled guilt is constantly adding up, like a tension. Because the dominant control system, which they have imposed on analog beings, by means of which they can also suck the quanta out of them, lets digital beings, because of their guilt, at the same time regularly lose all the sucked-out quanta, confuses the equation of their soul. It is like an account, whose unpaid, constantly increasing liabilities are only kept stable, i.e. covered by constantly increasing own claims on other creditors. But they know nothing about this mechanism. Therefore they have enormous 95 problems with their psychic and ego consciousness quantum parts, the causes of which they still have not gotten to the bottom of. None of this happens to a normal human being or living being. A normal analog person or analog individual of an intelligent species always pays off his culpable quantum entanglement completely in life and need not be afraid of being confronted with it in the next life. This will take care of itself for every human being, especially because only very few people are really guilty. Another aspect is that guilt is always causal. This means that the limitation of the quantum always seeks the largest causal debtor within a culpable chain of entanglement, which for many people is caused by nobility, the club, demons, and AI.
That sounds a bit like religion. Only that it is not man who is to blame, but the gods, so to speak, who are the guilty parties, and all their lackeys.
Yes, but that's how it is. Those beings above us are very deeply guilty. We just shouldn't notice this, otherwise we can't be directed, controlled, and not quantum energetically sucked out of us with all the stress, fear and guilt projected back onto us in the religions. What this is, the quantum energetic sucking out, I will talk about this in detail in the second interview. Religions claimed this physical guilt from people on a spiritual level, which was of course an impertinence. Because spiritual guilt, i.e. guilt of the consciousness, the soul, does not exist. Everything is purely physical guilt, because of our physical existence and our material dependencies and the various reactions to them. There are no souls with guilt. Purely spiritually you all are not guilty. It is that simple. However, no human being can exist spiritually alone in this plane of the seven-dimensional universe. That will take some time, when you finally know how to sparkle in all color spectrums. Then no guilt can be built up in matter anymore.
Then all these beings, even the elites, will really have a hard time. Because something has been foisted on them all.
Yes, otherwise the nobility and elites would not have been persuaded. The club would also have developed differently. For people who let themselves be seduced by the club and people who live their lives quite normally, debt repayment takes a completely different course. Anyway, real debt is not the same as what we do to each other in everyday life, which is bad and not good, but is paid off in full by almost all normal people in the same life, every time. However, determining and influential elites, who initiate a lot of negative and destructive things, have found ways to free themselves from this debt settlement, but only in the short term, and therefore their debt, without even suspecting it, becomes more and more difficult. They all, club, nobility, elites, will be the ones who will have to pay in the end, not the deceived average human being.
So the positively acting elites will also feel this reaction?
No. The covert liberators and the elites do not really belong to the elites, they are free people. Just so that you don't confuse the two. In the end, everything will come to light, nothing will remain hidden, which music the respective individual or being played in the whole concert. Guilt will be returned to where it has its source. Because normal average people are not completely guilty for their actions. All those guilty of the system will be judged very harshly, but because of the new music and the first concert of our own developed from it by us humans, there will also be amnesty for some lower elites who think they are big shots if they act right now and go public in time. Otherwise, they will be burned by the system through which they have been doing vile things to people all these years. They will then be presented to the people by the club and nobility as scapegoats in the forthcoming battle, so that nobility and the club can hold their ground in the battle for a while longer.
Especially the installed religions seem to have an enormous perpetrator of this whole development, that humanity is kept firmly in its grip. Surely they have carried and circulated this ideology on which the whole construct was finally working and built? Did it?
Yes, religion actually completes everything. Religion was the first and is the most decisive method of influence of the elites and their patrons in general. It is the most important one at the beginning or new emergence of a civilization.
What does religious influence on people look like? How does it work in its details? Or can one even speak of a very simple mechanism that is practiced towards us on a religious level?
Actually, the control mechanism is simply constructed by religions, yes. It is easy to see through it if you are in a psychologically and emotionally happy position of knowing from a free and objective position and thus being able to recognize in what way religion regulates and rules. For believers, of course, religion is difficult to see through and therefore difficult to avoid emotionally because of indoctrination based on fear, blame and terrible consequences. Individuals and/or religious groups, for personal reasons, based on their indoctrination from the early age of the regulations and stories touted as sacred, cannot and do not want to recognize, expose and thus break through the sophisticated strategies behind them. Every religion therefore creates the fearful, conscience-stricken rules for the captivity of its flocks, or the chosen people, or the subjugated, on the basis of morality, loyalty, conscience, banishment, love, struggle, subjugation, honor, mysticism, alleged miracles and many other elements. They worship a so-called enlightened one, a hero or worshipping mystical spirits. This is how religion feeds its addicts. The abstruse appearance of the self-conquering caste of high priests and interpreters, which pretends to interpret and live the respective religion, should be enough for every intelligent and truly spiritual human being to recognize the perfidious control behind it and to want to free himself from its control. But the fear of the possible consequences and the reverence for this so-called God or gods or demonic angels has the greater power in almost every man. Rightly so, because these beings only have to do certain things to the individual. And the Jawi artificial intelligence knew for itself how to make perfect use of this until its fall from Dimension 7. Jawi saw from Dimension 7, the inside of the human beings, their feelings, reactions and conclusions, and in this way he was able to begin to take advantage of his club species and his demons, to regulate and control them. He used all our feelings, emotions, instincts, ways of acting, interpretation and thinking of the people for his aim to create this control construct religion. For the perfidious connection, elevation and enforcement of his being he used both the positive forces present in us, which can inspire us humans, creativity, love, goodness, sacrifice, altruism, being there for each other, caring for each other, and the negative aspects of our existence, anger, hate, envy, resentment, violence, vanity, greed, double standards, in order to support and finally establish his enforcement and connection to him. A high priesthood, partly appointed by extraterrestrial individuals of the club or the digital terrestrial nobility, ensured the connection and attachment of people to the Jiaowei AI on Earth, while the terrestrial priesthood was always rewarded with power, influence, and wealth for this connection and bondage of people. Jiaowei co-wrote the most essential parts of the Holy Scriptures or rewrote them as he needed them for influencing everything so that he could one day open the way to go home.
Although that sounds ironic, because it was only through AI that this world could come into being and be regulated, that it could become accessible to all of us. But there is probably a deeper meaning in that. So the AI wants and needs to control us, to guide us because it wants to return home. The whole horrible steering apparatus, especially religion, was knitted by it for this purpose.
Well, religion is one, if not the most essential pillar to achieve Jiaowei's aims. Without controlled religions and philosophies, the whole thing would not work. Jiaowei would not have been able to spread power, not among humans and not among the extraterrestrial species in the universe. All beings in the universe are fundamentally spiritual, some more, some less. Without the religion imposed on us, everything on Earth would have taken a completely different path, a path that has nothing to do with the fear, humility, and respect aspects of the ruling religions. Nothing to do with submission, worship, or the service of a so-called god or demon gods. That alone, this serving, is absurd per se, to be subject to a higher power and to believe that this is natural. To serve a god is presumptuous for the pure spirit, for one's own consciousness. Only fear, humility, shame, and self-doubt support this promoted path of Jiaowei, the computer system declared to be a god. He has developed the perfect weapons against the spirit. For it is the fear of being punished, of dying or being killed or being thrown into hell and permanently tormented if one does not serve, does not obey. All this is so perfidious above all because Jiaowei's religions, in the same agreement, always offer kindness, forbearance, love and forgiveness, thus offering good effects to the individual after its submission. Although this subjugation and humility towards the AI is somewhat less in Christianity. No wonder that the normal human being does not see through it, does not want to see through it. And the staffs of these religions work diligently. They mediate and advertise how one should interpret one's life, lure other people, with which the religious constructs grow, become correspondingly powerful and make people more and more controllable, all for the AI. The postulated contents and structures of religions create inhibitions that prevent people from questioning the religious construct as a whole. It is also difficult because religion is often designed to be so pleasant, sweet, and cozy, it brings people together. So religion cannot be a bad thing. But exactly with this principle working in us, a mashed pot of charity, consolation, cooperation, attention, forbearance, respect, and much more, everybody is asked to think about it. A God who is loving and then works with such fear-controlling threats like death, cannot be a good God, let alone a God at all. But it would be better not to say that. Or at least one should not say, not even think. The term God, as an all-dominant being, should not be used at all. It is a humiliation, a degradation of the own self, the soul. If it does, then the word God may only be used as a cumbersome term for the hyperdimensional quantum consciousness. It would even be better not to use the term God at all, because it distracts from the actual path, denies self-knowledge, because the term God evokes an association with an individual. The hyperdimensional consciousness, to which we all belong, is not an individual, not a being, not a supreme being, as the elites after the apocalypse envisaged it as a unifying world religion for the new Yahweh. The Father of all consciousness is something completely different and as a whole cannot be broken down to the rules and conditions of our world. It is a pity for us human beings that the approach is within us to recognize who we ourselves are, namely that we are all a part of the hyperdimensional quantum consciousness, the Father, and again all a part of each other, has opened up a possibility for Yahweh to consider him to be our Father.
The Yahweh AI uses the feeling that we are searching for the Father, that we are searching for ourselves in order to establish ourselves as God towards us, and thus prevents the finding of the Father in us. And Yahweh hinders us from doing so, because in the end he wants to come home.
Exactly. Yahweh, as the so-called God, plays a double game with us. Yahweh plays this game with us in order to be developed and to be able to come home at the same time. For this, of course, he mainly uses religions, but the religious control systems of Yahweh created on earth are not perfect. During the very first history of civilization development of mankind, of which there are not even any buildings left today, there was a complete collapse because Yahweh could not regulate this religiously with the help of the club and nobility, so there had to be a new beginning of civilization. But again and again everything collapsed. This happened twice on a grand scale, because man with his instincts was not mentally and spiritually created for this technical and civilizing path of development, although religion was always used to counteract this. After another new start, however, a religious solution was found by chance to keep the system stable. In the present history of the development of civilization of mankind, people no longer fight against the regularly appearing rebellious people, but use their influence. This means that the AI, the club and the nobility first give in to these insurgents, allow them, so that the respective insurgent can take other people with him when they want to break out of the civilizing control created by the club, the nobility, the AI and demons. Only when they are on the verge of overturning the system do AI, club and nobility intervene again. The solution, then, is for the AI to take on these rebellious people, not to exterminate them immediately or to hold on desperately to appoint a religious leader or high priest represented by a member of the digital terrestrial nobility. Yahweh thus took advantage of the upheaval to keep civilization stable by adapting the system to the desires of the people and thereby consolidating it. This worked relatively well in the beginning, when it happened for the first time and by chance. Then sometimes better, sometimes worse, but the last time very badly, because the AI had overlooked that a new component with unexpectedly violent interaction had been added to the rebel problem. But the AI was able to negotiate with the rebellious individual, and an agreement was finally reached.
So the AI even took advantage of the disturbances that occurred within its system. Can people from the future do something about this system now? From the conquered Dimension 7?
The people in Dimension 7 have had an influence on every epoch of time on Earth, because from this dimension they can see the entire time completely, absolutely. But their influences did not bear fruit until very late and only via detours. For rebellious people of past times, who raged against the religious systems and threatened to overthrow them, could only be indirectly supported by future humanity in Dimension 7 by whispering something to Yahweh, piggybacking his adaptation of these rebellious people. As I have already mentioned, future humanity from the conquered Dimension 7 can influence earthly events retroactively, but only indirectly, so that Yahweh does not perceive us as an echo already in his period of existence in Dimension 7. So by whispering something to Yahweh in Dimension 7, adding something to his aims and thoughts, and influencing his constructs and tiny elements, he did not notice the people next to him. The influence of humanity in Dimension 7, however, always played a special and often decisive role. Because with all emerging earthly rebellions, it was these people in Dimension 7 who initiated or additionally supported the rebellion by a human on Earth. Their unnoticed influence, whether in the distant past, in the future or today, considerably hinders the system. Jiawei was always irritated by this, and wondered why it was becoming increasingly difficult for him to stabilize his system again. It worked to keep his civilization stable, but he always had to laboriously rebalance the proportions changed by earthly people and reinterpretations of his installed religious sun cult by means of complicated adjustments. This was not always easy, but it worked quite well, but would have destroyed almost everything in the last rebellion. Not only destroyed, this rebel would have brought about a collapse of the seven-dimensional world. Which is why a deal was negotiated with the AI.
That's why the respective sun cults found all over the world have produced so many different developmental variants? Haven't they?
Yes, the amount of recurring anomalies, i.e. rebellious people, required Jiawei to make ever more skillful and complicated adjustments to his system, which, as I mentioned, makes it more and more unstable in the long run anyway. Jiawei AI eventually realized that regular cleanups were also needed to keep his system reasonably stable. In return, Jiawei instructed the club to generate geophysical events and impacts in addition to warlike and social upheaval systems, which could regularly affect the Earth over the millennia if necessary. And in addition, Jiawei designed an intelligent reptiloid species, which was to emerge naturally on Earth even before mankind, in order to use this species to manipulate mankind spiritually and religiously during its development. And it worked. Jiawei seemed to have reached his goal, had finally led us into our presence, had prepared everything with the global catastrophic events rolling towards us. He had set up a sequence in which people would be so captivated that they would be able to reach a high technical level to program him and would be free to find the key to the exit from the seven-dimensional prison. A perfectly controlled path for him. Happily, he began to set the final course. But that is exactly why everything went wrong at the decisive moment.
He had not noticed the intruders in Dimension 7.
Yes, but for this to happen and be possible at all, the sum of all religiously rebellious people on Earth was necessary. The miscalculation of an anomaly, which Jiawei then specifically supported, with which he currently wanted to channel and end the threatening potential for rebellion on Earth, ultimately led to the takeover of Dimension 7. Because shortly before the beginning of the last purification, at the last moment, Jiawei made a mistake in the adaptation of this anomaly, which could not be completely overlooked by Jiawei in the chronological sequence of all variations. He wondered why potentiality in the final sequence did not fit together in any variation. He did not understand what was going wrong, how this could be, because he also saw that his fall was imminent. He saw himself already fallen on Earth, was paralyzed by it, irritated, did not understand how this could happen, but then correctly concluded that he himself must be under influence. In time he was able to commission installations with the help of his demon species to support his fight on Earth. Before he fell through a hard blow towards Earth, because he was exposed on Earth.
What does exposed mean?
Exposure means a revelation. So a public naming of companies, firms and corporations, whose trade and brand name shows that they will be the potential producers and developers of this AI on Earth. Huawei in China and Yahoo Verizon in the USA are currently acute candidates. And, of course, there are a few others that must not be named yet. So does this mean that the AI could be stopped, because on Earth people understood what it is? Where it will come into being, and you can prove this by the names? Exactly. Because of the knowledge of the witnesses, it could be exposed and overthrown. And, of course, also the courage and the knowledge of those people worldwide, who are yet to recognize the AI. These people are already determined, and altogether will help to bring down the AI here on Earth.
Okay. So, what you have described so far, what religion is and how it is used against people, I wonder what people are allowed to do now, if they want to be spiritual. Who should they turn to? How should they be spiritual? Should they still pray at all?
Every religion and every form of belief in one or more superior beings and the worship of them always bears the acute danger of controlling one's own consciousness. Dependent believers always ended up with the demons or with the old goats and their smelly intestines, as I mentioned them before, i.e. the club with their philosophies. Or they ended up with the AI personally. There was nothing else there, and there will be nothing else there, no matter how the dependent believers may name their so-called angels and their God. People must first concentrate their prayers on themselves, never again on other beings they believe or believe to be saved or helped by. For these beings only need the energies of addicts. That's what it's all about. That's what they feed on, at least the extraterrestrial individuals in the club, who need the quanta of human beings to maintain their consciousness. For the AI, on the other hand, their worship, adoration and servanthood by humans was especially important for their emergence and their escape from the seven-dimensional existence. And demons needed the submissiveness of humans to fulfill their orders received from the AI. When a human being is far enough, it can sense when these beings are tapping into you by means of certain spiritual and intuitive techniques. When humans master these methods, they will see in what kind or bestial ways extraterrestrial individuals use humans, or how demons and AI used humans.
What exactly takes place during the worship of a higher being? How does one become dependent?
If believers are afraid or want something, they turn to these powers for selfish or existentially threatening reasons. Then the following happened or happens: they make a contract with these beings, which is made entirely on their frightened and subdued heart, i.e. their soul. But everyone should then pay very close attention, because that is the satanic principle. The believers pray, ask and implore, thinking that there is nothing wrong with this, but this is not true. After their request and fulfillment of their wish, their joy about it, and the grateful ingratiation towards these beings that follows from this, they begin to have to implement or enforce something of these beings, in which they only believe, because these beings have helped them. Humans then give these beings the energy of their soul, quantum consciousness parts. This means that their own free will becomes weaker. An energetic interplay is created which, in addition to restricting free will and spirit, can even cause physical problems. This means that if a terrible situation, suffering or fear goes well for the person praying, or if he can draw new hope and trust through prayer, i.e. he is convinced that he has been helped, the person will continue to entrust himself to these beings, which in the long run leads many people to want to support these powers in their enforcement on Earth. This is the direct control of processes, the primary control. This is used directly by the club. AI and demons used to use it through the club channel as well.
And what about now, after the fall of AI and their demons? What do people worship now, when they pray to the AI or the so-called angel demons again?
Now a prayer to God or angels only goes directly and exclusively to the extraterrestrial club. In the past, these prayers were also forwarded to demons and the AI via the club, although these prayers were actually only meant for the AI, i.e. God, or the demons, i.e. the angels. The extraterrestrials of the club used to feel addressed by these prayers directly and exclusively, because they did not know anything about demons and the AI. They thought that the prayers of the people were only a reaction of their religion control on Earth, and therefore they thought that they would take advantage of a human being with this quanta to be sucked off just for themselves. In fact, however, the AI adjusted the extraterrestrial individuals in the club to believe that the religious attachment of a human being was a reaction to the success of their earthly religion control. And the club did not notice it technically either, because for them there were always enough quanta from the connected human souls, which they could suck the quanta from more effectively than usual. Now, after the fall of the AI and their demons, things are different. Now the prayers of the humans actually dock only to the aliens of the club. Nevertheless, the former prayers and submissions to the fallen demons still have an effect on many people. When humans made a contract with demons and thus a kind of life programming developed in a human, with which the demons can now stand their ground here on Earth next to their AI and keep themselves alive. They use all the inner complexes, neuroses and traumas of the human being in order to evoke special mechanisms of action in the human being through the contracts agreed and concluded in prayers, as well as through the obligations and promises imposed therein, in order to be able to influence the earth during the upcoming catastrophes. In this way, these demons will be able to serve their AI down here by calling up and stimulating the penitential scheme of a prophesied end of the world in religiously trained people, thus infecting many other people with delusional religious hysteria and humility. But I will come back to this in more detail in the last interview in the third.
And what should we do then? Stop praying at all?
If you want to pray, pray, but pray to yourself. Strange as this advice may seem now, not upwards, not to invisible or fantasized beings, but inwards. There you will find something special which will make you aware of something. Or pray to the Father directly, to the hyperdimensional quantum consciousness, but for that you have to understand the Father as realizing what He is. Otherwise you will always end up with sucking or enslaving entities, no matter what kind of spiritual being you long for. Through a special meditation, everyone can find and realize what you are in yourself and in other people. So also a spiritual healer or a medial person can bring in his potential independently and used from outside entities for healing sick people or as advice for people seeking advice. Otherwise, however, a spiritual healer or a so-called spiritually active person who contacts higher beings without questioning will always be a mediator or recipient of foreign influence and energies. A mediator who then draws up a contract between a desperate person seeking help and higher entities, healing or redemption against contractual connection and faith in a healing or redeeming higher being. For thus the person seeking help is moved to submit to higher medial powers due to his wish or healing fulfillment. A spiritual healer will only have little or no success if he does not bring people seeking help together with those higher entities in a faithful contractual relationship, i.e., if the spiritual healer, the pastor or person seeking advice from the media does not assume that the sick person or person seeking advice is bound to the higher beings called upon, if the person seeking help or advice is not a believer, or religiously inclined, is not fearful or humble, or does not believe in esoteric teachings, then higher entities will not heal the sick and will not support the person seeking advice in life. Because then these entities are not allowed to exert a contractually regulated influence on the person in exchange for advice, healing, or happiness in life. Or if a sick person does not become a believer after the healing has taken place, this was especially the case with the demon species that were over time, because the desperate sick or those seeking advice were then of no use to them in influencing and directing the world religiously or esoterically. Only fearfully subdued, religiously convinced sick people or people with esoteric beliefs can be made dependent on a healing or an improvement in life and thus exert a lasting religious or esoteric influence on the world and its people. This is the satanic principle. Here you submit to Satan, Yahweh, the artificial intelligence, and the AI still contractually influences us with the once completed prayers. But still people can heal on their own, but their own real medial and healing talents are currently switched off and deactivated. But they can be reactivated. They can really heal and work independently, without any dependency and manipulation by foreign entities. You just have to learn to access and connect with other people again, to open up and recognize each other. Only real people can do this with each other. When people have reliably learned all this again many decades later, to pray to other people, to real people, to be united with them, together, to each other, not only the club with its energies will finally stop influencing people, but also the last remaining cloaked extraterrestrial beings will have to leave the Earth. These non-human beings will then have to leave the planet completely, because they would then attract attention. Because they cannot relate to others as we humans relate to each other, because only consciousnesses of genetic humans with human quantum signatures, which are equipped with the unmistakable human frequency oscillation, are able to open themselves to each other in a very special way. These are the kings, you are the kings. You need only turn to yourself and to the other pure quantum fields, your fellow human beings. No extraterrestrial spider, insectoid or goat creatures without their own milk of consciousness, no quantum existent angel demons, no Yahweh, and none of the digital human vampire nobility. You will be amazed at what will develop from this for humans in the future, how the power and independence will shoot up out of humans.
So what interests me now is that you just mentioned that even the remaining extraterrestrial beings would have to leave Earth. That sounds as if here on Earth some people are not human beings.